Hey, I'm Cynthia Thelen. I'm the director of the Caring Connections Ministry out of the RBA. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a mentoring program for women struggling to overcome barriers of poverty or who are newly in recovery from substance use. And we offer mentors and life and job skills classes and all relationship-based services. So just like your church, we've had to shift and get creative in the way that we minister, using digital platforms, not meeting, socially distancing. And that takes some skill and effort to make that type of shift. And so today, I'd like to talk to you about ministering to your community in a COVID-19 world in light of the Mathew 25, 30 through 40 verses of serving the least of these. And when we think about who the least of these are, we think about our congregation and the community around us, and how can we serve them in new and creative ways. So what I'd like to do today is to challenge you to identify who your community is, how you can serve them, and what their needs are, to think out of the box a little bit in some ways that you can serve, and then how do you promote your outreach to your church and to your community. So to start off with, I'd like to ask, who is your community? When you think about your outreach, who are you ministering to? And I would like to challenge you to think about that in three ways. One, your community is your church, your congregation, those who are members and attendees. They may have been members in attendance before COVID-19, and then now some of them may be virtual members. You may not have ever met them, you may not know their names or see their faces, but they're watching on your digital platforms, your services, your small groups, anything that you're posting, they are part of your congregation now. Second, your community is also your zip code. That may be a 3 to 10 mile radius, but those people that live around your church, that pass by your church on a daily basis as they go about their lives. And third, your community is also the larger community, the Raleigh community that we're all part of. And so how do you serve those three groups, those three parts of your community in this new shifting world of COVID-19? And so I also am going to challenge you, before you identify different types of outreach services that you can offer, I would encourage you to do a need assessment. As a social worker, that is the first place we always begin, is to identify what the needs are rather than assuming that we know. I'm a huge fan of surveys. I know not everybody is, but I think churches can get a more accurate view of the needs within their congregation by conducting a survey. As you all probably are familiar with SurveyMonkey, it's free, very easy to set up. You don't have to be super tech savvy. So that's a great service to offer when doing a survey. And it will allow you the opportunity to get a broad spectrum of needs. Obviously, when we think about needs and serving and outreach, most often we automatically think of food insecurities, housing insecurities, maybe clothing. We think of those basic needs. But in today's times, and really always, but especially during COVID-19, those needs within our own churches and community are ranging all the way from basic physical needs to emotional, mental health, and spiritual needs. And so you want to get just a true assessment of where those needs are and what they are in your church. So through a survey, you can ask questions to gauge what's going on with your membership. Are they isolated? Are they feeling lonely? Are they struggling with parenting? Are they struggling with marriage under high stress times? Are they struggling with alcoholism and substance use, or financial loss, job loss? Many of those questions people aren't comfortable answering in person. So while you can conduct a need assessment by having your deacons, your church, your lay leaders call one another, ask, see how they can help, many times people aren't that comfortable being vulnerable and that transparent with needs. And so the safety and anonymity of a survey gives them the opportunity to fully share. You can also include open-ended questions that allow them to expand upon something that maybe they've answered in a question, or to offer some needs and ideas that weren't specifically asked in a previous question. Then you gather those results, you identify where the greatest needs lies, and you try to form groups and services and collections that meet the needs of your community. Second, how do you minister to your zip code community? If your zip code community demographics parallel the community within your church, meaning the age range, the economics, the education tend to be very similar, you can make the assumption that the needs identified within your congregation are probably the same in your zip code. If there's a vast difference in those categories, then you may want to call your local nonprofits that are within your zip code, your schools, community centers, and ask, where are the needs? How are you serving? What concerns do you have about our community that maybe aren't being addressed by the local church or local nonprofits? And that's the same approach to taking an assessment of the largest community, which is Raleigh. Before you decide to host some type of collection or to meet a need, call your local nonprofits. Call and ask, hey, where is a gap in service that you're experiencing that our church can help with? Maybe it is a collection, maybe it's a group, maybe it's encouragement partners, maybe they need errands run for some of the constituents and people that they serve. So before you set out to develop your outreach plan, I really encourage you to reach out, do an assessment so that you can gather the most accurate information, and the goal is to be sure you are addressing the needs that exist. And remember, these will be done virtually or in a social distancing kind of world. So keep both those platforms in mind. And as you're reaching out, keep in mind also that we are talking about, again, a broad spectrum of needs. We're not limiting it to the physical needs, but we're including stress and anxiety and depression and substance use and all ages, children, the youth, your parents, your singles, adults and senior citizens. So you want to be sure your questions and your need assessment encompass all of those demographics. So once you've identified your needs, you have a plan, and you start to put things in action, you want to be creative with your virtual and your in-person. Now, we all at churches like to do collections, and so I just have some reminders here of ways that you can collect and serve. Obviously, we can use food for those people that are food insecure. You can host food drives and support some of the local food banks. There are small ones as well as large ones. You may even identify a need within your community, within your church, like an apartment complex, an assisted living home that maybe has few visitors and few support. You may want to connect with the Raleigh Dream Center, who serves several lower income communities in the southeast Raleigh area. You may want to do something creative and host a food drive just at your church and invite the local community to come by. Something I'd like you to consider too, as we're thinking about outreach, is outreach doesn't always have to be about just meeting a need. Sometimes outreach is simply a gesture of love. It's a gesture of kindness to say, we see you, we hear you, we know you're hurting, and we're here for you. So you might pick up food and deliver it to some to-go items to families within your church or families within your community that you've identified are just needing a pick-me-up, or you just want to say hello. You might think of doing a frozen casserole party. Think outside the box. You gather several members within your church who all agree to make meal kits. You have a frozen casserole. You attach a recipe to the top, a flyer that talks about all of the events going on at your church, all of the platforms that you're offering digital services, and invite them to attend, maybe a personal note with a name and a person that they can actually reach out to, and then attach a bag that has side items to go with the frozen casserole. And you maybe have Monday meal pickup, and you promote it throughout the community. They can drive up, get a bag to go, or you could host that in an apartment complex that you've identified has some needs. Be creative with the way you're distributing food. You may want to also, in terms of distribution and collections, think about doing a clothing drive. Host a clothing drive in the fall when the seasons change and kids are, school is changing every day, but will obviously be in some type of school and might need new clothes. You could host a collection where folks in your church drive up and leave items in a box that people are there available to pick up. Keep in mind when donating clothes, you want them to be new or gently used. And gently used means free of stains, holes, no personal names on it that might relate to, a particular soccer team or someone's name. They're clothes that could be generic for any new person. Book collections are also other creative ways that we can serve during this unique time. Kids are out of school and not everybody will be going back, and libraries are not as accessible. So contact Read and Feed or Raleigh Dream Center or a local community school and ask, is there a way that your church could host a book collection to get books into the hands of children so they can continue to read and strengthen their reading and language skills while at home? Another area to keep in mind when we're thinking about collections is a household hygiene or diaper drive. These items are not included under food stamps. Food stamp services are strictly for food, so offering a collection to support, again, one of your identified communities or nonprofits, you could collect everything from toothbrushes to toilet bowl cleaner, household cleaner, and hygiene products, and that helps offset costs for those who may be out of work or experiencing greater cost with childcare, with that increase that's going to be coming as the schools transition and kids are out more often and in need of childcare. So think of creative ways that you can host collections. Next, I'd like to talk about how do you meet the emotional and spiritual and mental health needs of your community. We are created to be together. Human beings are created not to be in isolation, but to fellowship and to be in relationship. And so with the pandemic, we are finding ourselves very separate and feeling very alone. And some people are less likely to talk about that. So how can your church fill in that gap? That may be services online, small groups and Zoom meetings online where folks gather to share. That may be driveway gatherings, driveway dads where dads get together, or driveway dudes where men get together to share. You may have groups of common interest for people that have lost jobs, stress groups for get a counselor within your church that's willing to offer a group for those who are experiencing high anxiety. Parenting groups to help those parents who are struggling with trying to work, ease their kids' worries, manage school. They need a safe place where everybody can share and be able to be vulnerable and support one another. And having good leadership for those groups is important. Someone that is skilled at group dynamics, someone that's willing to put in the effort to guide questions, to follow up with members in the interim of meeting, and to really be a source of support. I encourage you to also keep in mind the different needs of the different age groups. So old school pen pals are a great way to continue to serve and meet the needs of senior citizens, those who maybe are homebound or those who are home but just aren't getting out as much, and those living in assisted living homes or nursing care facilities. Connect your young people or even just your adults with seniors. You can do porch visits, you can do notes, and children love to receive mail too. Let's not forget that many kids are still isolated at home during this time, and they're missing their friendships, they're missing their church. So how can you incorporate them? How can you engage them? And that's within your church or even with a community. You might choose to sponsor, to adopt a local neighborhood, a local apartment complex, and spend the whole month or two supporting them in a special way. There are lots of notes that I'm going to have attached to this video that give you some additional ideas of going into ways you can serve. Engaging the skills already within your church. If you have cosmetologists or a landscaper or a handyman that's willing to not only help those within your church, but maybe in your community by providing a service and going to their home when these families maybe are financially at a crisis and can't afford or don't want to get out. Think outside of the box in the ways that you can perform outreach. And please remember also that we want to provide opportunities for folks to gather in person at a distance, always following the North Carolina guidelines, and virtually online platforms. But for those that maybe aren't comfortable with tech, being tech savvy, or being in a group, how can you make sure they're not left out? And that may be through an encouragement partner. Maybe those folks would like someone that just checks in on them, does a porch visit from time to time, calls. We don't want to leave out folks that fall in the middle of the gap because they aren't comfortable in person, but they're also not comfortable online. So think about that. And also some fun. Again, we're relational human beings, so finding ways that we can still enjoy each other's company. That might be book clubs, Bible studies, crafting groups that maybe craft online together, even supper clubs where couples maybe bring their own meal and they meet outside to socialize and have the supper club outside or online. Anything where we can keep engagement and we can engage the community. Also, I want to end a little bit here on how do you get the word out. So let's say you've created some food drives, you've created some outreach groups, you've created opportunities for engagement. How do you let people outside of your church know? You want to use all digital platforms. Everyone is online now, so your Instagram, your Twitter, your Facebook, your website, email blasts, you want to make sure you're using all of those platforms to share the word out. But I think even more importantly, you want to make sure your church members are sharing those items when they see them, they're commenting on them to keep them alive in the feed, and you want them to invite others. You want them to choose, if you're having a mom support group, you want to ask 3 or 4 or 5 moms within your church that are going to participate to share it with their friends. Or even if they're not going to participate, ask them to invite 10 others. You want folks to pass out flyers in their neighborhood if they're in your community. You want folks to reach out to folks that they've identified could use a support group for people who've lost jobs. or for people who feel isolated. You want to really engage your church congregation to get the word out. And let's not forget old school mail and flyers, and let's not forget a banner outside of your church. That's great publicity as people drive by, to highlight all of the things you're going on, to make reference to your website. And it's incredibly important to keep your website updated with all of the virtual services you're offering, all of the outreach offerings, all of the groups that you're offering. And also, when you're thinking about groups, they could be held on site somewhere else. If you want to partner with a local apartment complex, you could meet in their community center. You could meet in a parking lot. So I just really encourage you to think outside of the box. And finally, I want you to remember that sometimes we have to break out of the COVID bubble. Are we scared sometimes? Sure. Are we anxious sometimes? Yes. But as followers of Christ, it is incredibly important that we don't shy away from an opportunity to serve and love others as he did out of fear. So if you're with someone and they're sharing some heartfelt concern or very emotional, and you feel the nudge of the Holy Spirit to reach out and hug them or to reassure them with a pat, don't shy away from that for fear of COVID. I encourage you to take that chance. That may be the Holy Spirit nudging you to really make that connection. The longer we isolate and the more we pull away, the more people are left out and feeling alone. And we want to continue to minister to one another as a family of Christ. If you have any questions for me, after reading through some of the information, feel free to contact me. My information will be on there. If you're looking for resources on nonprofits to call, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to offer, we as in myself or the RBA, we'd be happy to offer some suggestions on local nonprofits, small and big, that you can engage in. But I encourage you to start with your needs assessment, reach out to your church community, your zip code community, and your larger community. Think outside of the box in ways that you can serve through not only meeting tangible needs, but the emotional, mental health, and spiritual needs as well. Thank you for your time.